Hello and welcome to AGH on Film. My name is Ryan Ferguson and I'm the curator of film at the Art Gallery of Hamilton. This week we are joined by Heather Young, the director of the 2019 Canadian feature film Murmur. Heather is a filmmaker originally from New Brunswick, now living in Halifax, Nova Scotia, a graduate of the University of New Brunswick and NASCAD. Heather's short films Fish and Milk have played at film festivals all over the world, including TIFF, Palm Springs Short Fest, Vienna Independent Shorts, the Maryland Film Festival, Edinburgh International Film Festival, and TIFF Canada's Top 10. Her debut feature, Murmur, tells the story of Donna, who has recently been convicted of driving while impaired and is ordered to perform community service at the local animal shelter. When an elderly dog is scheduled to be euthanized, Donna decides to take the dog home and quickly realizes his companionship can ease her loneliness. In a futile attempt to fill the emptiness she feels, Donna begins to take home more and more animals, and she is soon in over her head. Murmur premiered at the 2019 Toronto International Film Festival, where it won the Fipresci Prize for the Discovery Program, and it most recently won the Narrative Feature Grand Jury Prize at Slamdance. And we're very, as I said, very lucky to be joined by Heather today. Welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good.
Murmur is your debut feature. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the process of making the film and the jump from short films to feature filmmaking?
Sure. Like you said, Murmur was my first feature. I'd made several shorts over the course of about 10 years before I made Murmur. I started making shorts at NASCAD University here in Halifax when I was in the film program there. And then after I graduated, I did several shorts over several years after that. I started working in kind of like a hybrid form between fiction and documentary a little bit with my short films, and I brought that process forward into Murmur as well. We made Murmur through Telefilm's Talent to Watch program, which was previously called the Micro Budget, which is a program put on by Telefilm for first-time feature filmmakers to have opportunity to make their first feature with a pretty small budget. We also had some help from Canada Council for the Arts, so that really kind of allowed us to finish the film the way that we wanted. So that was helpful. And we shot the film mostly in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, where I live, just across the bridge from Halifax. And it's all kind of real locations locations that were kind of open to the public and working locations that we were shooting in. We kept our crew really small. So we were quite nimble, like a documentary crew would be, so we could kind of fit into these situations and locations. And we shot for 25 days. I really wanted to have a lot of, as much time as I possibly could. So we knew that going in, and my producer and I made sure that we prioritized having enough time to really examine the locations and really kind of act accordingly to what was going on around us and be able to kind of be spontaneous while we were shooting. And that was something that was really important to me going in. So yeah, we made sure we had enough time to do that.
Were there any specific challenges in transitioning from short films to features that you didn't really foresee when you went into the process?
It's funny. I expected the shooting process to be a lot more difficult than it ended up being, because I'd only ever shot short films, which are only a shoot of a couple of days usually, and I don't really work like on set in the industry, so I knew that I wasn't used to being on set for such a long period of time. So I was worried about that, but that ended up not being as bad as I thought it would be, I guess. But what ended up being more challenging for me in terms of transitioning from shorts to features was the editing process. I was the editor on the last couple of shorts that I did, and I was the editor on Murmur, and it was just such a huge leap going from editing a short to editing a feature. We had, obviously so much more footage, and I was just completely overwhelmed at the beginning. I found it quite daunting, the idea of taking that amount of footage and somehow, sculpting it down into something manageable. So it took me many months before I actually got it to kind of like an assembly stage. But once I did get it to an assembly stage, I found that everything kind of fell into place in a sense and moved a lot faster. So once I hit that kind of landmark, I was able to start cutting out a lot of things a lot faster than I had been before. So things picked up, but there was a few months in there where I was worried that I was never going to get to the end.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about the style of documentary fiction? Because I think as you're starting to talk about editing, I think we're probably crossing over into how the film gets made and where the story is told. So I think it might be interesting to talk a little bit more about the style and what led you to that sort of form. It seems to have, it's been throughout your work thus far.
Yeah. So yeah, I started working that way in my short film work. That kind of came out of, after film school, I felt like there was kind of this pressure to, always try to get a bigger budget and try to get, more experienced crew to work on your film and more experienced actors to be in your film. And, I did that a few times, and I ended up feeling kind of sort of intimidated by working with all these people who had more experience than I did. I was right out of school, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and I didn't necessarily want to be worried, about what these people with more experience were thinking about, what I was doing, or maybe they were thinking that they would have done it differently, or something like that. And anyway, I ended up feeling kind of distracted by those, those questions. So I decided to kind of take a step back and just start making work kind of on my own to really get back to why I wanted to be a filmmaker and what I enjoyed about filmmaking. I really wanted to kind of remember, why I liked doing this. So I started making films basically by myself. And when you do that, you have to, use what's available to you. I wanted to work with people that I was comfortable with, as opposed to, people I found, maybe inaccessible or intimidating in some way. So I started working with my family, and I made a short film, with my mother, and that was kind of a blend of her real life with some fictional elements. And then I made a short film called Fish with my cousin and her children. And that was, that's where I really started blending doc with fiction, in the sense that, I shot a lot of pretty straight doc footage for that short. And then over a period of several years, kind of crafted a story out of it, and then ended up shooting more, kind of fictional elements to place on top of the doc stuff to kind of give it like a through line. And I just really started enjoying working that way. It felt very kind of organic and natural for me. And I felt comfortable, working with people that I knew and people that I trusted. So then when it came to a short film I did called Milk, which is the short I did before my feature, I decided to kind of try to find like a happy medium between, working with a crew versus working totally by yourself. So I ended up just working with a really small crew of just kind of my friends, people I knew from the local film community here. And that worked out really well. So that's kind of what I did again with Murmur. I, just had a really small crew of people that I knew and trusted, and then continued working in this hybrid form that I felt was creating, the kind of authenticity that I was looking for in my work. And So, we cast non-actors and we cast a lot of people kind of in their own profession, like veterinarian playing a veterinarian, that type of thing. And, like I mentioned before, we shot in real locations. And so even though the feature was more of a fictional story, I still kept some of those doc elements in there.
So you mentioned working with non-professional actors, and I'm curious, talking about the form and working with non-professional actors, how you're crafting a script. Is it a scenario-based situation, or are you writing out dialogue, or how does that process work when you're writing a film with these sort of stylistic intentions?
Yeah, so for Murmur, I did write a traditional script. We needed a full script to apply to the Talent to Watch program. So I knew I was going to have to, write one anyway. So I did, and it was very helpful. But in terms of working with the non-professional actors, a lot of them didn't even receive the script, didn't read the script. My main actor, Shan McDonald, who plays Donna in the film, she read the script, but it was kind of just in order for her to understand, the story and what's happening. But there's no one in the film had to memorize any lines or practice dialogue or anything like that. Everyone speaks in their own words, including Shan, the lead. So that's something I've been doing for a while, and it's been working really well for me in terms of creating kind of a natural, realistic feeling with the performers. And I also think it takes some pressure off of non-professional actors who can, feel overwhelmed or intimidated by having to memorize a lot of lines. That's something that's very challenging, obviously, to do. And if you've never acted before, that can be something that's very daunting and can turn people away from, wanting to work on the project. So I know Shan was very relieved when I told her, right away, like, don't worry, you don't have to memorize any lines. So basically what we do is for the scene that we're shooting, I just talk to Shan about the scene and make sure she understands what the scene's about. And sometimes there's certain information that we need to get across. So she knows, this is something that I have to make sure we get across in the scene. But she's allowed to just speak in her own words and be herself as much as possible. And she brought a lot of her own personality and her own life experience to the role, which was really important and just, added so much depth, I think, to her performance.
Yeah, I think it really comes through in the performance in the film. As a director, working with non-professional actors, obviously there's a lot of, it's a much different process. How do you feel that, influences the film itself, I guess, when you're doing that style of work?
Well, it certainly lends itself to kind of a certain aesthetic. I've always had a kind of gritty realism, I think, to my work, and having that kind of unpolished feeling of actors kind of, speaking in their own words and sounding like real people and looking like real people has been something that I think lends, a certain realism and authenticity to the work, and I hope kind of allows the audience to empathize further with the characters. They can see the characters as real people that they can hopefully relate to, or they can imagine themselves, in that position. So yeah, my goal, is to try to create as real a feeling as possible, I guess, with the characters, so that the audience can hopefully empathize as deeply as possible.
There's something about the intimacy of the 4:3 screen ratio, the aspect ratio you shot the film in. What was the decision-making process for shooting in that ratio, and what was your experience using that smaller frame?
Yeah, it was my first time shooting in that aspect ratio, 4:3, and partly, influenced by what you said, it being kind of an intimate aspect ratio. Um, I did some research, when we were considering which aspect ratio to go with, and I came across some writing by Andrea Arnold, who shoots in 4:3 pretty much everything she does. And she described that aspect ratio as a portrait frame. And I thought that was a really effective way of describing the 4:3 aspect ratio. And really with Murmur, I wanted it to be a portrait film. It's very much about one person and one person's perspective. So, we focus a lot on Donna and her face and her reaction to the things going on around her. So I just, I loved how the 4:3 aspect ratio really frames the human face in a really nice way. Also, we used it to kind of emphasize her isolation within the film. She's, she's isolated from friends and family, and that's a big part of what kind of drives her towards getting more pets. So we tried to use the framing in the film to really kind of emphasize that she's lonely, she's isolated, and the 4:3 kind of square frame allowed for a really nice use of negative space and some interesting framing of Donna herself. So that pretty much sums it up, I guess.
Yeah, I actually felt like the composition of a lot of those frames is very important to the feeling of the film. So when you are changing that sort of style of working, how much time are you putting into composition of shots? Are you doing rehearsals? Like, what's the process to switch styles like that?
Yeah, we put a lot of time into the composition of the shots. Me and my DP Jeff Wheaton, we did quite a bit of research before we started shooting, just into watching 4:3 films together, looking at 4:3 photography, talking about the framing that we liked and the framing that was getting across the themes that we were interested in. And then, like I mentioned before, we had prioritized having enough days of shooting to really take our time with every shot. I didn't want to be so rushed that I couldn't look around me and find out what were the best angles to shoot from, and what were the frames that were really speaking to me in terms of the theme of the piece. Jeff got me a viewfinder and with like interchangeable lenses. So I would use the viewfinder to set up every shot we did. I would walk around the whole scene looking for for the right frame. Because another thing with our film is we decided to not move the camera. So the camera is locked off for every shot. So when you're doing something like that, you're really committing to that shot, so you better like it. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to make sure that I felt really good about every single shot in the film. And Jeff really helped me a lot with finding those shots as well.
There's a few things that you've mentioned sort of through the course of talking about the aspect ratio that I'm trying to sort of funnel together into one sort of specific thought. And it's, you're talking about an intimate character study, a film about one person, the tightly composed shots and not moving the camera. And what that all kind of leads me around to is watching Donna go around her routines in the home. I started to think of sort of the standard of Chantal Ackerman's Jean Dielman. You mentioned that you watched a lot of 4:3 films to prepare. Is there any specific influences at work in this film and how you structured those sort of elements of it?
Yeah, certainly. Well, Jean Dielman is certainly a big influence on me. That film, I feel like changed, you know, what I thought was possible to do with cinema. Especially, yeah, the, you know, the framing, but also the use of duration. And yeah, I guess a film that I discovered while we were doing research into the 4-3 thing was a film called Ida, made in 2013, and I can't say the director's name properly, Pavel Pavlovsky or something.
It's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Jeff and I watched that film that was shot in 4:3 and also has a almost always stationary camera, and they've really used negative space in a fascinating way. I felt in that film that the negative space, yeah, in the framing really seemed to kind of get inside the head of the protagonist. And so that was a big influence. And yeah, also I would say, like, in terms of cinematography, some of Ulrich Seidel's films, in terms of just really kind of, well, blending of doc and fiction, but also just static camera and really deliberate kind of formal framing, and kind of mixing formalism in that way with a documentary feel is something that I've been trying to work towards.
No, that's fascinating. Thank you. I haven't seen all that. So, but yeah, Ida is a wonderful film. It's beautiful to watch.
Yeah, it's really nice.
So when you were starting the process of creating the character of Donna and fleshing out this story, what sort of research did you go into to write the script? Because obviously Donna's dealing with isolation. She's attempting to overcome addiction. So maybe talk about the research you did to create Donna's character.
Sure. So originally the idea for this film started around 2014 when I made a short film with my mother called Howard and Jean, which is just a little film that I just made by myself with her. And that was about her and her relationship with her Chihuahua, Howard. It dealt with themes of, you know, aging as a single woman, and living alone, and feeling kind of, you know, removed from friends and family, and you know, trapped to a certain degree. And you know, it explored kind of a codependency that developed between this woman and her pet. And so I started thinking, you know, what would that story look like if I took it to a more extreme place? Like, how far could I push that story? And that's when I started thinking about, you know, well, what if she can't, you know, she keeps trying and keeps adopting pets because she you know, she wants to feel that connection. She wants to feel connected to another living thing, but it never quite satisfies her. So she keeps getting more and more and more. And that's where the kind of animal hoarding idea came into it. So the idea kind of started there, and then from there, I added the kind of animal shelter aspect to the film, and that was part of my own kind of lived experience. I used to work at an animal shelter back in my hometown, St. John, New Brunswick, and ever since I had that experience, I'd always wanted to film in that environment, and I'd been kind of thinking about shots and picturing the visuals for many years. And while I was working at that animal shelter, you know, we had people coming in doing community service, usually for DUIs. So that was, you know, something that I kind of took from my own lived experience for the character. And then I ended up doing some more research into that. So I reached out to basically the person who runs the Driving While Impaired program in Nova Scotia. So, you know, if you have a DWI charge, there's a whole kind of set program that you're entered into, like for education and, you know, various other components, counseling, etc. So I had a meeting with him, and he was really, really helpful and gave me all, tons of information and PowerPoints, and, printed me out a lot of information about the program and what participants, all the details of what the participants go through when they're in the DWI program. And then by the end of the meeting, I just said, would you want to be in the movie? So, because I was wanting to cast people in their actual professions. So we have a scene in the film where Donna is attending an education session for driving while impaired participants, I guess, and the man who is giving this PowerPoint presentation, that's him. That's the guy that I had the meeting with, and that's his job. He does this presentation every week. So he knew how to do it perfectly. And I was introduced through him to a lot of other people. The counselor that Donna sees, the addictions counselor is a real addictions counselor in Nova Scotia. So I was introduced to some people through that, and yeah, everybody was really generous with their time and their knowledge, which was great.
Well, that's great. Was the presentation the actual presentation he gives every week too?
Yes, it was.
Well,
Yeah,
that's great.
It was the actual PowerPoint presentation. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier finding the line that runs through the film. I actually reviewed on your Vimeo page all of your shorts, or there's several of your shorts available on there. I watched them all in a row up to the film, so there feels like there's a bit of a line that connects the last three shorts and the feature. Is that apparent to you? Does it feel like this is a summary of the work you've kind of composed over the last several years, or?
Yeah, there's definitely shared themes that have gone through my work up to this point. Certainly various kind of visions of motherhood, I think, has been a theme that I've been interested in, and that has come up in a lot of my work. Also, loneliness, isolation, not feeling like you fit in. Those things have come up again and again, I think, in my work. So I guess, I'm interested in those things. But yeah, it's kind of interesting, when I think of the kind of single mother theme, I think that runs throughout my work. It's quite apparent. And, I was raised by a single mother, and I think that it's a very interesting experience that hasn't been fully explored, in cinema, especially from the perspective of a single mother. I think that's something that I've been fascinated by and continue to be fascinated by, and I think it's an important perspective that hasn't really been fully explored.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's so much amazing room for telling stories from these perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
The film is obviously won several awards, nominated for a Canadian Screen Award, I believe, as well. We're kind of currently in a industry-wide shutdown, it would seem. But starting from this point now, what is the next project? What are you working on or hoping to work on when you can get back out into making films in the world again?
Yeah, I know. It seems like I don't know when that's going to happen, but
yeah,
I'm sure at some point we'll be able to make films again. Yeah, I've been just working on my writing, and I have a kind of loose sort of idea of something that I would like to pursue, that I've been working on, here in quarantine. So it's again a story of a female perspective, but yeah, I haven't fully fleshed it out or fully committed to everything yet. So I'm just kind of more at the ideas stage. So just kind of working on that and trying not to put too much pressure on myself, you know, during the lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of people are like, well, this is it. This is the time to write your next script. And, you know, it's true. It's a good opportunity, but, you know, you're also dealing with, you know, the stress of the pandemic and everything. So I'm trying not to be too hard on myself, but I am chipping away at a new writing project.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's not necessarily the time to be productive, but it's good to hear that you are. And thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to whatever comes next. Again, Heather Young is the director of the film Murmur. It is available on the Art Gallery of Hamilton's virtual cinema at artgalleryofhamilton.com. And if you're watching this video in 3 months, it's probably available on some online viewing platform. I know all of Heather's short films are available on her Vimeo page. I highly recommend going to check those out as well. So thanks again.
Thank you.